Ashley Hlebinsky details how the Firearms Research Center plans to use a $1 million federal grant to develop a Second Amendment history course. That and more on this episode of the Weekly Reload Podcast.
No, the devil's got no hold on me.
All right, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Weekly Reload Podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Gutowski. I'm also the founder of thereload.com, where you can head over and sign up for our free weekly newsletter today if you want to keep up to date with what's going on with guns in America from a sober, serious perspective that focuses on hard news and analysis. This week, we are talking about a pretty interesting new grant that was given out by the Department of Education to the University of Wyoming's Firearms Research Center to develop teaching resources, education resources for a history and civics class on the Second Amendment that is planned to be taught across the country at K through 12 schools. So a pretty interesting development. And to discuss that, we have with us Ashley Hlebinsky, who is one of the directors at the Firearms Research Center, who's been on the show back when the center first launched, but now we have her back on. Welcome back to the show, Ashley.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining us and coming on to give us some more detail and background on what exactly is going to go into this program here. Why don't we just start off real quick with a refresher on your background and on the Firearms Research Center itself at the University of Wyoming.
So my background is, it's a little funny because the Firearms Research Center is housed within the College of Law at the University of Wyoming, and I am not a lawyer. So it's a little funny, but my background is in firearms history. And so I spent a decade at the Cody Firearms Museum, which is a very large AAM accredited museum out in Wyoming. And when I was there, I was responsible for basically gutting the entire museum and rebuilding it. We reopened in 2019. And I'm a full-time consultant, so I do a lot of different things in the history sphere. So I work with museums. I build museums that are firearms related. Obviously, I'm the executive director of the Firearms Research Center, which I don't think everybody always knows that, we're still small. So we're still kind of a mom and pop shop. So George is a full-time professor and our director, and I'm the executive director, but I'm a contractor. And so I'm actually working on a lot of other history projects around the country. But my big background is in public education and interpreting firearms in a way that is kind of accessible to people who are either across the gun debate or even just across the level of knowledge about firearms. So obviously I work with a lot of people who are collectors and super hardcore aficionados, but my specialty is really with people who don't know anything about guns. And, when I was at Cody, it was kind of like, if this is your first time walking into the museum, because there were 4 other museums on site. So it was one of the few museums with heavy firearms collections that would get non-gun people in. My specialty ends up really in being is how do you approach people in that world where they come in, they may know nothing, they may be afraid, they may have a strong hesitancy towards the subject matter, and how do we find common ground in order to be able to discuss history and how history can impact a more productive discussion today. So that's kind of I didn't come from guns, I didn't grow up around guns. So I came from this, like when I started studying firearms, it was a completely academic thing for me. And then I was the, East Coast liberal that ended up running a gun museum in Wyoming. So it was like, I went through the gamut. So let's just say I understand people from a range of different perspectives. And now I'm somewhere, hanging out in the middle, trying to talk to everybody. So I very much try to focus very heavily on people that aren't familiar with material and meeting them where they're at.
Yeah, and so you come more from the historian approach to the gun field, and George McSorley, I don't know, co-director, you're executive director. He's also a
Yeah,
director.
it's kind of a weird research thing. It's a weird academic thing that I had to learn too. So you've got the director, and then you've got the executive director. And so I don't know, it's a different thing. The executive director is more involved in the running of the institution, whereas George is more of like the scholarship side of things and working
Okay.
we are hiring, not to get ahead of ourselves for the talk, but we will be hiring a research director who will be working on this grant, who will stay with us afterwards. So,
Okay.
it's kind of more of like I get the stuff done and out to the public, and he's, doing his thing and writing his books and all of that,
Yeah,
and
because
he's
he's, as you mentioned, he's a law professor. He's written textbooks on the Second Amendment, but he focuses obviously more on the legal side of things.
yes.
Certainly, there's overlap between the history and the legal side, which will be relevant in this discussion about these course materials you guys are developing. Um, but that seems to be the breakdown there, where he is a professor at the school who focuses on the scholarship, the legal scholarship side, and then you are someone with a background in museum curation and study of the history of firearms, and so you kind of combine those two things in this relatively new center, right? It's just
Yeah.
launched in 2023. It's uh, but now it's been up and running for a couple years, almost 3 years now, and you guys have started to develop more programs, right? Can you tell us just a little bit before we get into the course what you've been up to lately?
Gosh. Well, and you make a good point. I mean, he's the law professor, I'm the historian. And part of the reason that we, got together on this project was because we saw a lack of firearms knowledge across disciplines, obviously from our respective ones, but, in engineering programs, people who want to study firearms from an engineering perspective, in the business school, in the public health sphere. There's been some really great work in the sociology sphere, especially at ASU. I was actually just speaking at ASU at the Bridges. If you're not familiar with them, you should talk to them sometime. Jenny Carlson's amazing. Um, and so there've been like more and more centers popping up, but we wanted to be able to basically be a hub for a lot of different firearms disciplines to be studied. So even though we obviously are coming out of the law world, we welcome, presentations and scholars who are in a lot of different parts of academia and practical people too, people in the gun world itself. And so we've been busy. We just had our fall conference. So we do a conference every fall. Our first one was a mental health conference, and it was, oh my gosh, I was shocked. We had like 400 people in person and online. It was very, very successful. We did it with the Wyoming Department of Health and the VA, and one of our days was dedicated to the actual like legal side of mental health and firearms and gun ownership and liability for FFLs who are, potentially taking in a firearm temporarily for someone in a time of crisis. And then we had a whole day dedicated for clinicians. So that's a part of that like interdisciplinary thing that we do. Last year was on the National Firearms Act, which is a lot more niche, and it was very law focused. And then this year, I was really excited because I got to bring in some of my people, and we did it at Springfield Armory National Historic Site, which was a ride because they are a government institution, and they reopened 1 week before our conference that was being held there. So,
Oh, you got lucky then.
yeah, we were very, very lucky. I had backup plans, but they weren't as cool. And so that was a 2-day conference that was kind of centered around the 250th because I like to tell people like it started this year, it's not just next year, it started this year. You could argue it started the year before as well. But we wanted to do a conference where it all began. So obviously Massachusetts was a good choice. And we did lots of different topics that were material culture focused. We had the curator of Colonial Williamsburg there. We had the curator of Springfield, obviously. We had a ballistics specialist who does archaeology on early battlefield sites. But then we also had, of course, the policy sides of things because we are in a law school. So we had panels on the militia and kind of the founding era concept of the militia versus how we had that dialogue now with the Bruin decision. We had one on disarmament. And then the night to kind of kick things off, we actually did a fireside chat where it was, and all of this will actually be available online. We'll upload it here probably in the next couple of weeks. But that one was really neat because I called it exercising the Bruin test because I think I'm clever because the Bruin test came out of the Bruin decision in 2022, and you also have exercising your Second Amendment right. And the Bruin test basically created a hierarchical system. I think that's a word of historical timeframes that are considered relevant in
Right.
descending order when you're talking about the constitutionality of a firearms law in the founding era around the ratification of the Second Amendment is considered the most important. And so I had George Moxery, who's our executive director, and I had Megan Walsh, who is the visiting. I heard like I had to say her title without reading anything. So she's the visiting clinical professor at University of Minnesota, and she's also the director of the Gun Violence Prevention Clinic at the university. So two people that are usually very much in disagreement. I brought them together,
Yeah.
and we did a fireside chat. I basically wanted to bring people together in a less combative, non-courtroom vibe, to have a conversation about how people are using history post Bruin in order to make these modern legal conversations, and how we can use the same history to vastly different conclusions. And so George and Megan, we picked topics like domestic violence and 18 to 20-year olds and felons and firearms and different topics that are really assault weapons bans. And George and Megan just kind of had a conversation about where each side comes from and what historical pieces that they point to in the court system. And it was really kind of great because one of the things that they kept talking about was that there are a lot of points in which they do agree, despite being often on polar opposite sides of things. So our conferences have been great. We do a monthly webinar series which covers a lot of different topics. We do a lot of continuing legal education credits, obviously. But yeah, and we've been publishing working papers. We had a special issue in the Wyoming Law Review on the NFA, and George and I travel around the country speaking at conferences. And we also do a yearly home and away program with the Duke Center for Firearms Law, which is a workshop that we people come and they workshop papers, usually newer scholars, although we do get some people who have been in the field for a while. And
Right.
we always make sure that the opinions are, I hate saying 50-50 because it's so much more nuanced than that, but we try to make sure that the papers come from an equal range of perspectives,
Right.
and all of those people in the room to raise a new era of kind of collegiality with the study of the Second Amendment.
Mm. Yeah, and I think from that description of what you guys have been up to the last couple of years, uh, there's a lot to pull from with how you plan to approach this course development that you have this grant for. Because when I read the press release that you put out, that it sounds like you're trying to take a similar approach. Because I think, especially if you're like I am, like we do here at the Reload, focus a lot on gun politics. It's very easy to have a simplistic narrative around this news of this grant, where you could say, well, the Firearms Research Center has, George McSorley, it has David Kopel, who's some of the top names in the pro-gun side or the expansive view of the Second Amendment, to the point where Kopel, who's been a guest on our show a number of times, um, really helped develop what's called the standard model for the interpretation of the Second Amendment that has now become the accepted method at the individualist's rights view of the Second Amendment that the Supreme Court has adopted itself. And say, well, oh, this is a grant from the Trump administration to a relatively pro-gun group, and that's simple. The gun rights people will be happy and gun control people will be mad. But when I read the press release, and from this description of how FRC actually operates in practice, it doesn't seem like quite that simple of a story. There's a lot more nuance here. You're not really trying to develop like a curriculum to try and convince students of the particular political point of view, right? I mean, how first of all, how did the grant even come about? Was it, you know,
Yeah.
was the
So the
process
grant,
political in any way, or how did it
no.
actually work?
No. So there was an announcement that was released. I want to say it was like mid to late June, from the Department of Education. And I don't know if your listeners know how kind of grant processes works. I've been a
Probably
grant
not
reviewer.
specifically. Yeah.
I've been a grant reviewer on historical sites, the National Endowment for Humanities type of stuff. So it's more museum and historic site focused. So I've seen it kind of on both sides. As an applicant, Cody received an IMLS and an NEH grant when we were rebuilding Cody. So I've kind of been on both sides of it. So I know a little enough to be dangerous, I guess. So there was a call for applications in June, for a civics. And when I say civics, because I think it might be misleading that it had to be Second Amendment. It very much, I was surprised that we even accepted that we even got accepted. It was civics in general and civic literacy. And so it was a grant to kind of work with secondary teachers and work with students in secondary schools on increasing civics literacy in honor of the 250th. And they use the term semi-quincentennial, which is probably my favorite word, although Word does not believe it is a word when I had to type the grant.
Microsoft doesn't agree.
Does not agree. So yeah, they had it was basically just a call for grant applications. George saw it. He sent me a message and was like, "Hey, let's apply for this." And I was like, "Cool, it's due in 2 weeks." I was a little concerned. But I sat down and I kind of worked through it and we created this program. But like I said, I honestly was really surprised when we got it because I think there's probably a misconception out there from, I would say, gun and non-gun people that because this is the Trump administration, obviously there'd be gun programming that would get pushed through in different departments. And yeah, we are seeing that for sure. But the Department of Education is kind of, those grant programs are in a different space. And so when you apply for these grants, it's not one or two people up high deciding, oh, hey, I want Second Amendment programming in the schools. They probably don't even know it's happening, if I'm being honest. I could be wrong, but they probably have no idea. Um, but there's not one or two people, it's a group of people who are blind reviewers. And so you create your grant application, it gets submitted, and the Department of Education goes out and finds teachers, usually people who are living in the world. So like for me being a curator for many years, I worked on the historic sites and museum types of grants. They go and find those teachers and they ask them if they want to participate and they review all the grants. And there's like a scoring system and how much they relate to the core mission of the grant and all of that. And then they tally up the numbers. And, there's some probably more deliberation than that. I'm trying to remember. It's been a long time. But then, the grants are chosen. But it's not, it kind of transcends administrations, if you think about it, because you're not everybody that works, in the administration currently, is a new employee. A lot of them are people that still work during the Biden administration. So this is one of those cool things where this wasn't buy-in from one or two people on high. This was a group of people nationwide who I would guess based on just kind of my, anecdotal understanding of, American culture when it comes to guns, I would guess that most of the reviewers probably had little to no experience with guns and maybe even a hesitancy towards the study of firearms, especially considering that it is now a firearms course in a classroom, which is incredibly difficult topic for a range of different reasons. Um, so I was really happy that we got it because I wasn't expecting it. I didn't think that it would go even with, the administration, that everyone talks
Sure.
about. I still didn't think that people reviewing it would want to go for it. So I
Yeah,
was
in
really
your
happy to see
in
that.
your experience, then, from your point of view, it wasn't a politicized process. This was more of a traditional grant process where bureaucrats at the Department of Education uh, looked at it on the merits and thought this matches what we put out as a request. This is a civics course. It's part of this 250th anniversary initiative that DOE is undertaking, and it just fits with what was requested, and it isn't something where like
Yeah.
I think it's Linda McMahon is the Secretary of Education wasn't like you didn't have contact
Go
with
find
her
a
or
go find a Second Amendment
yeah
person. Nope, nope. We
okay
tortured ourselves all on our own with that application. But and it's not just people that work at the Department of Education. The people who review these aren't affiliated at all. They're
hmm,
people like me who have a vested interest in terms of like this. I understand historic sites, so teachers of I'm teaching civics classes right now, and one of the things that we talk about in our grant application was the fact that this is one of those topics that it needs to be taught regardless of how you feel about guns because it's a part of the Bill of Rights, but it's one of the ones that teachers find the least easy to talk about, and when it's such
right
a difficult thing to talk about, then they don't talk about it. And
hmm,
so we're like missing a piece of a much bigger puzzle in terms of civics and government and history education because people are afraid to broach the subject, which understandably so. Like it's a messy issue out in the real world. So it only gets, magnified down at the school level And it's also so hard because, like, when I was in grad school, I was a TA for a history ed class. So it was their last semester before they went out and did their kind of in the field work before they graduated. And my one job by that professor was to fail them all. Um, and he said, "Don't worry, they don't know this, but I'll adjust their grades at the end of the semester. But like watch them freak out because these are, usually honors students that have never gotten a bad grade, in their life. And now I'm failing them because it's not, passing them, passing the I said muster, but I don't think that's the right expression. But I worked with them and it was this really shocking thing to me for me to learn is that these people, when you're early teachers, yes, you're a social studies, you have a social studies degree, but when you're down on the totem pole, you don't get to make that choice. What's social studies? You could be teaching US history, you could be teaching Asian history, you could be teaching psychology. Psychology falls under that too. So you get these people who have a great holistic training and, as you get more seasoned, you get to choose more of the things that you want to do. But now you're asking those people who are trying to educate, their students, you're now asking them to wade into one of the most messy debates in the US and try to have, a short, because it's certainly not dedicated to the whole semester, right? A short, concise educational unit on that for your students that's not completely marred by political talking points on one side or the other. It becomes very difficult to sift through all that in order to do that. So it is really almost an impossible task for teachers to be expected to understand a topic, any topic, super super deeply, but then also a topic that is so difficult to talk about in their own lives, in their
Right.
schools. So I'm happy to see it get a chance, but I also am very aware that it is gonna be difficult to do.
Yeah, and so speaking of that, what is the overarching goal that you have for what you're going to do with this grant? Like, in the specifics of what you're trying to develop as far as resources for the teachers that are going to have to actually put this stuff into practice in the classroom.
Yeah, so we've got several components to this. We've got tools and access, I guess, is kind of and I guess tools are access, but for this purpose, I'll separate them. So we're trying to do a lot of things for teachers. A lot of this is focused for teachers in order to educate their students because I do realize how hard it is for them to have to facilitate these dialogues for their students. And so we will be creating 12 instructional videos on different topics with the Second Amendment. And these are kind of historically rooted videos on, the original text of the Second Amendment, the colonial militia, technology, the National Firearms Act, the Gun Control Act, the second founding era Civil Rights Act of 1866 and the Freedmen's Bureau and the 14th Amendment that plays a big role in the kind of modern conversation about the Second Amendment. And so these videos will be a teaching tool for teachers for sure, but they could also use in the classroom. And they're not meant for like commentary. I mean, obviously, you can have one fact and everyone can interpret it 10 ways different, but it's more along the lines of, the National Firearms Act was enacted in 1934. It regulates, machine guns, silencers, short barrel rifles, and shotguns. It implemented this tax stamp. Here's the background. Like it's more like that. It's not, it's not a person's opinion on whether or not they like the NFA. It's just kind of here are the details of the NFA. Here are the details of the Gun Control Act. So that type of thing that gives you basically that foundational information without a hardcore spin on it. It's just what it is. And then we're also creating a database, and we've been working on it, but the grant is allowing us to go a little bit deeper, which is all historical firearms laws in the United States, which is quite an undertaking. And we're not just listing the laws, but it's a very searchable function. But there'll be scans of the original laws, so the full text of the documents. There are other databases out there, but they mostly focus more on just kind of like putting the text there, but not necessarily like the scans. And for teachers, obviously primary source material is really, really important. So we'll have those scans. And
Yeah, and that
then,
that seems to be one of the key components, at least in their press release, of this
yeah,
operation is trying to bring primary source
material
documents
into the
to these
classroom. Yeah.
teachers. Yeah.
And there'll be an AI feature on that. But I'm a neophyte when it comes to technology, but the AI feature will be available to teachers, specifically for free, and it'll basically be a way for them to sift through a lot of the material, and help them point to, which laws they want to look at for specific things. We've got someone who does that that could probably speak way more eloquently than I can about that,
So
but I
again,
know it's been
search
a
and
topic of conversation because I have my own
yeah,
thoughts on AI because I've
sure.
we don't want to digress too far, but if you ever want to hear about how I wrote a historical timeline from Colt while experimenting with AI, it was a trip. Uh,
Right. Yeah. Well, obviously, I mean, I think most people recognize that AI can be helpful for search and summary, but comes with its own drawbacks of things like hallucinations.
exactly.
So I imagine that will be part of the
The evaluation
approach to making
process.
sure that
Yeah.
it's not hallucinating, as the term is, some facts that aren't true. Right.
The hallucinations are strong with ChatGPT, that is for sure. I
They
think if
can be.
I
Yes.
understand it correctly, it's gonna be a completely internal AI. It's not gonna
Mm.
be pulling from other things, it's gonna only
Ah,
pull
okay.
from the
And
database.
so it'll
I
be
could be wrong, but
perhaps
I
less
think if I remember that correctly in talking
less
to the
susceptible
tech
to those
guys.
issues then perhaps.
Um
So beyond the database though, so videos, you got this database, but
So
that's
then
not
the
all,
other
right?
side
There's
of it
several
is
more.
engaging with teachers and really giving teachers a chance to engage with scholars in the field. So we'll do a quarterly webinar. So it'll be 8 webinars on various topics. We haven't ironed out exactly what the topics are going to be. We'll be working with an advisory committee and we'll kind of finalize that. But these topics will be kind of more relevant topics to today, things that we hear about in the news. So it could be assault weapons bans, it could be red flag laws, but things that we hear about, that are so contested, um, and we'll do a webinar and we'll bring in people with opposing viewpoints, maybe even different disciplines, to some extent. And the format that we're planning for, although there's always trial and error once you actually attempt to do it, is that there'll be a webinar. It'll be for teachers. It'll have kind of a quick summary of the topic, and then you'll have a scholar on one side who will kind of run down what that side's argument tends to be, where they're coming from, what their perspective is. Then the other sides, where they're coming from, where their perspective is. So kind of like the fireside chat, but a little bit more structured, and then opening the room up to the teachers to then just ask questions of these scholars. I think it's really important that teachers engage with different opinions and different perspectives, because if you're a teacher that's pro-gun, you pretty much I could probably recite pro-gun talking points, and same on teachers that support heightened restrictions. You could probably recite all of those talking points. You've heard them before, although I will hope that the scholars will provide more nuance for the people that agree with them, the people in the room that will agree with them, but they don't often get a chance to engage with someone who is incredibly intelligent and well read on the subject matter that they disagree with. So I hope that there'll be an opportunity for them to actually ask questions and not get lectured at. Not have talking points thrown in their face. And they also get an opportunity to see scholars that disagree get along, which is something that people don't see. When we started with our Duke conference, the first time I actually attended in person, I was like, "Oh, I wonder how this is gonna go," because I don't live in the Second Amendment law world, because I'm history, and I was like, "Wow, everybody likes each other." I had no idea. I was really, really surprised, and so,
Sure.
I think that that's also really important for people to see is the scholars saying, "Hey, we got common ground here, but this is where we disagree." So
Yeah, or
letting
even just
teachers
having them directly talk to each
yeah,
other is not that common,
no,
especially these days. Maybe more so in the scholarly realm, but generally speaking, people tend to silo themselves off into their own, you know, echo chambers, their own bubbles, and where they really only hear from people who agree with them. And so, just having them, you know, be able to have a respectful back and forth exchange seems valuable to me. Obviously, that's something we try to prioritize here at the Reload as well, with some of the stuff that we do, but very different um, application from what
yeah.
you're talking about. And I think, it's interesting to hear your perspective on it, because I think this course offers a big opportunity for the Firearms Research Center, which is, as we discussed, only a couple of years old at this point. Raises certainly your uh, profile, but also gives you an opportunity to show people, what you're trying to accomplish as an institution. Same for, and it's an opportunity for American school children to be better educated on the topic. But of course, it's also there's a risk here, right? Because a risk that people will perceive this as political propaganda one way or the other. Frankly, there could you can get backlash from program people for incorporating views that they don't like. And so I think uh, there's a challenge, right? You seem very aware of here, that you want to be rigorous in the academic application of uh, these resources that you're going to make available, but also have a fair representation, not just a token representation of what
Yeah.
or a straw man representation of different points of view, but a fair representation from noted and accepted scholars that discuss that point of view. And it sounds like that's a big part of the goal here.
That is, that's a big part of the goal, and it puts us in a difficult world. And we do have one more component of it, but I'll make a
There's an
comment first
in-person
before.
conference
Yes,
as
yeah,
well,
the
right?
in-person conference. But I was just going to say to that, it is a difficult world, and it's been one of the things that we've struggled with as a research center in terms of sustainability and funding, because we do, one of our fellows is a pacifist, and we do work with other, universities that have very differing opinions from the gun world. And we got hit initially when we initially were founded, like, oh, you took money from gun companies, but we didn't take gun rights money. That we did not take advocacy group money on either side. But yes, we took money from gun companies. One of the pillars of the research center was to help people who want to be lawyers in the firearms sphere, not just Second Amendment, but like a product liability lawyer or a lawyer for the ATF. And so there's a practical side of that, and also the quintessential, people have heard me say it a million times, donors don't dictate content. And I will turn down a donation if there are restrictions. We don't accept restrictions on our donations. So it sounds bad, but like when you actually, like, if you knew about it, there's no one's given me anything with a restriction on it. I won't allow it. But it makes it very difficult for us to actually raise money, right? Because because we're not doing that, and so sometimes we're not as sexy, and it would be very easy to just succumb and give in because there is more money if you're an advocacy organization. But I just truly, personally, don't believe that those exist. But a true organization that is trying to, combat misinformation, but allow people to have opinions is really, really, really essential right now. So even though it's great that we finally got some real money for it. So I hope we don't mess it up. But that is it's been a really interesting, weird, wild ride. Because, we're damned if we do and we're damned if we don't. We can't ever make, everybody happy. And I mean, me personally, like a couple of months ago, I was called a I was called a woke anti-gun academic who ruined the Cody Firearms Museum. And then we had a university not want to work with us because of the fact that we've taken money from gun companies and that I'm a shill for the gun industry. Like one 24-hour period. So it's a
Yeah.
weird world we live in, but hopefully that makes us hopefully successful in trying to navigate this. But to the last point, we'll do a capstone, which will be an in-person conference, and the plan is to continue it annually after the grant. We will be funding 100 teachers to come so that people, I say at a location to be determined, because I don't know when we get a couple years out or a year and a half out where we'll want to do it based on the teachers who are participating, because I want to make it easy for people to get to, and Wyoming is not always the easiest place for people to get to. So we'll determine that as we kind of figure out nationwide, because teachers are opting in. I'm not forcing anybody to do anything. And I think that's
Right.
also an important probably perception, is that, this is a propaganda piece that's going to get forced, into the classroom. This is an
Right. Right.
optional, thing for people to participate in. Um, but this conference will be a 2-day conference, and the first day will really be dedicated to expanding upon the instructional videos, like actually interacting with scholars who wrote the you know books that helped inform the instructional videos. It'll let them engage now with that content. So it'll be all about the Second Amendment from different perspectives, legal perspectives, maybe historical perspectives. We'll have to figure out all the details on that, but it's just kind of an expansion of that conversation. And then the second day will be dedicated to workshops. So for me, one of the most important things out of this is teachers feeling empowered enough to be able to facilitate difficult conversations in the classroom. Because it is like I recognize it is a difficult thing, especially in today's society with students being so afraid of, school shootings and mental health crises and not having enough mental health counselors in schools. And, like I get it, and so for us, we want to then take, okay, you now have all this knowledge, and you've been able to interact with it and kind of formulate your own opinions. But now, how do we have this conversation in the classroom to students who, may have strong opinions of their own, but then also might just be afraid of the topic in general because of what they see, on the news and what they see from their peers. And so figuring ways for those teachers to be able to answer those questions so that things don't, you know, just devolve into a political debate and conversation. And we will have one of the pillars of the center is community outreach. And our biggest initiative is our suicide prevention initiative. Because unfortunately, when it comes to firearms deaths, that is a huge portion of that equation. And
Right,
in the
about
state of
two
Wyoming,
thirds.
Wyoming is it might be the number one state with death by suicide. And so that's been something that's been really strong with us. And so I don't know exactly what it'll look like, but we will have mental health professionals on our advisory committee. And there will be some type of firearms safety. We will have a trainer as well, firearms trainer. They're not coming in and do gun training. I should probably, qualify that. But
Not
somebody
going
that
to be
has that.
handling guns as part of the course, right?
Yeah, yeah, like,
Necessarily.
don't worry, it's not I can read that headline, but we'll have people from that more practical side of things and the public health side of things to facilitate a workshop on that conversation because we know that there's a mental health crisis with students, younger people. I sit on the board of mental health organizations. So there'll be that component. So that day will be very much dedicated to everyone kind of getting together and figuring out how we can take information that we now know and apply it in the classroom in a way that's actually productive.
Okay. And yeah, so and I think an important point here is how you're going to go about choosing both the advisory board that you mentioned that's going to help put together these materials and these the events and then also the scholars that you're going to choose to participate because as you mentioned here as you noted this is a contentious issue. It's difficult oftentimes for people to get past their first impression even if it's a false impression of FRC or even the Department of Education or this grant process or what have you. So how I guess how are you obviously want people to get past that whatever their first impression might be of this and have a full understanding of the nuance of what you're trying to accomplish here. And so how are you going to put that in practice when it comes to picking this advisory board to incorporating which scholars to have involved? What is that going to look like?
So the advisory committee we've been working on for a little bit, trying to iron out the specific people, and we'll hopefully have everybody locked in like a week. So I don't want to necessarily say anybody's names until we have it locked in. But what we did propose were the types of people we wanted on the advisory committee when we applied. So obviously, George and I will be present. But we wanted to have some teachers. So we'll have two teachers. One that we're looking at right now that I'm planning on is somebody that's local to Wyoming, but he's actually been working with civics programs around the state. And he's also, I think they've moved into like some of the surrounding regional states. So he's got that connection with the teachers. It's kind of with teacher advisors, it's kind of a faceted approach. One, help us get to the other teachers, right? How do we get to the teachers? Because they know the associations and the committees, but then also, what makes sense to students. If you talk to George, you'll be like, that's great. No student wants to hear that. How do we write, videos for students? And the College of Ed will also have a person on the committee at University of Wyoming who will be helping with script writing and making sure it's at the right educational level and all of that. I will be doing a lot of the script writing as well because I have a background in I'm a television writer for better or worse. So I know how to make things, concise and to the point. So we'll have the teachers, the College of Ed representative. One of our teachers that we're planning on, she actually does come from the gun world, but she's in the unique position that she's a former gun person. She's still a gun person, but a former person in the gun, influencer world. But she's now a civics teacher at a high school in the Midwest. And she did get approval to teach a Second Amendment class next fall. So, she brings her knowledge of guns and teaching, but then also like will be able to kind of administer some of this in her own coursework. So it was kind of a she was working on this completely separately, and so it was kind of neat that we might be able to interact there. Then we'll have 2 outside scholars, so people not associated with us, George and I. One that I hate this because it sounds so oversimplified, but one person that's more pro, expansion. So someone who's more pro Second Amendment and someone who's more in support of restrictions. And I do think I have those people as well that I've worked with a lot. Awesome people, super smart. So we'll have people on opposing sides that are actually in that scholarly world, and then our public health person, who I believe it's going to be a representative from Walk the Talk America. We may add another person to that just for balance, but and then like I mentioned, we'll have a firearms trainer there because I kind of wanted to get that practical application, and they know how to meet people where they are. Well, a good trainer, and some are dicks, but we'll have somebody that works with the outside world, and maybe brings
Mm.
in the outside world. The person I'm hoping for also has a solid connection to urban communities down in the South, and I think that if they're able to do it, they called me right before we started this interview, so I'm keep my fingers crossed. But having access, not just to suburban neighborhoods in Wyoming and the Midwest, but also being able to reach major cities. So I'm trying to orchestrate a group of people that have different skill sets, different viewpoints, but then also maybe even outside of their like purpose and role, they may have their own expansive networks that can help out with what we're doing. So that's kind of
Mm.
the committee breakdown, and we'll probably do like a press release once we get everybody squared away, that kind of
So it'll
announces
it'll be
everybody.
publicly
Yeah, yeah,
available information once you have
yeah.
everything lined
I
up.
imagine I'll put it on the. Right now, we have a grant portion of our website. It's very small. You can just it's like a little bit about what we're doing and a sign up for teachers so that once we start rolling, you're on already on the sign up and you'll get all the information. I'll probably add it to that page as well with everyone's little bios and everything.
And beyond the advisory committee, do you have scholars that you've begun reaching out to for the seminars that you're planning?
Yes and no. Yes, but also not formally ironing out dates and topics for a few reasons. One, we got our grant and the government shut down the next day. And so everyone's a little behind the eight ball. We're meeting with our grants person for the first time on Tuesday. So, I want to have a little bit better sense. This is actually one of the largest grants I think that the university's ever gotten. So we're, put on, there's reporting requirements because we're new and all that stuff. So I want to make sure I understand all that before I finalize that. But yeah, we work with a lot of scholars, and I've had some unofficial conversations with people that have been at our conferences, at our workshops. But I also didn't really, since we hadn't announced it, I had to be kind of like cagey about it because I didn't want,
Right,
I was like,
right. You
hey,
didn't want to
we do
scoop
these because
yourself.
we also do a monthly webinar for the research center that will continue that have scholars and whatnot. So, what's interesting and what's kind of nice is that the academic community, at least a portion of it, because trust me, I know some really combative academics who may think are brilliant, but I don't. They're not right for this. But like I feel like people would be surprised at how much we all end up working together. So, we being like the royal we, the academic community tends to know who the players are who are willing to come to the table and have a conversation because we're all at conferences together. At Duke, when we do the Duke conference, I mean, that right there, I could probably pick everybody right out of that room. And the person
Because
that
they
we're
have their
looking
own.
at.
They all, Duke University has its own firearms law
Yeah, they have the
center.
Center for Firearms Law.
Mhm.
And so it ends up being a really small it's a smaller network than people realize, and we already know who each other is. And so we'll kind of go through, and the committee will help me. One of the roles of the committee will be to review everything that I do for, neutrality, making sure, we're getting to the right people. And that's why they'll have different backgrounds. So they'll make recommendations. But I'm still trying to work out exactly how to not miss somebody that may not be as well known because it would be a great opportunity to bring someone, into the fold that maybe hasn't had the chance before. But we've had a really large, there have been a lot of research centers that have popped up over the years, and we're all pretty much, working with each other. Like I said, there's the one at ASU, Bridges. Um, There's one at Wesleyan University, there's one at, Duke, there's one at IU that people don't know about, there's a smaller center at IU. So these places have popped up, and it makes it a lot easier to find the scholars who might be willing to participate because we're all now in the same room at different things, throughout the years. That'll be a little bit of a quick learning curve, but we should have that ironed out probably by the beginning of next year, because the goal will be to do our first webinar at the beginning of next year. It was supposed to be the end of this year, but that just wasn't possible with the government, being closed for the first 6 weeks of what
Right.
was supposed to be the grant. So,
Okay. So, I mean, it's going to move pretty fast then here. This is a 2-year grant, is my understanding.
yeah. I guess it's
Just,
more like a year and a quarter, or year and 2/3 now, but with us kind of theoretically starting in October. But yeah, there'll be a steep learning curve right now, getting the, committee all on board and accessing all the teacher networks and trying to, reach out to the teachers. I mean, that'll be something that we do throughout the whole thing, but I need to like kind of blast everybody when the new year comes around, to make a
yeah,
push there.
it's not going to be 2 years of developing the resources.
No,
It's
no,
going to
we'll get the
be, you're going to
webinars
have the
going.
resources ready and you're going to start doing this next year.
Yeah, we'll get the webinars going real fast. And then I will be hiring an external evaluator for the whole project. So we'll have someone evaluate midway through to see if we're reaching the right people, if we're, on point with the messaging, and then we'll obviously have someone do a summative review at the end. And then the videos I will start writing in, so it'll go real fast and then it'll calm down a little bit. Where we'll be writing the videos like next spring into the fall, because those will take some time to gather information. I forgot to mention one of the funding pieces for the grant is hiring a full-time research director, and so they'll be doing a lot of the pulling of research for us so that then we can write scripts. Um, so we'll work on that. I think what the plan is to film the videos, if I'm remembering my timeline right, to film the videos later next year, so that they're accessible to the teachers, either late
And this
fall,
is
early spring.
K to 12 is the
This is
audience.
middle school. The grant was for anything from
Okay.
K to 12. Ours is more, it's gonna be more high school focused, but if there's any
Okay.
type of bleed into middle school, because there are civics classes, in middle schools, then that's, but the focus is high school for sure.
Yeah.
This
So
is a
it's more of a
pretty high school
basics course,
conversation. Yeah.
or maybe a little bit beyond basics, but not graduate level, deep research stuff here.
Exactly. Yeah, so that, and then our in-person conference is going to be in summer 20, what is it? So next year's 2026. Summer 2027, I think, is when we're planning on doing that conference, because we want to do it then. And then we want to get teachers, if they want to write like sample curriculum that we can post on the website and share, and give access to other teachers that we can review. We want to be able to have a good summative, closing down of the grant, and having several months, because the grant will end October 2027. So give us a few months to, follow up with the teachers. And because we want to continue, if you're involved in this, if you end up getting involved in this, and anybody who's a teacher who wants to sign up for the webinars is available. And then as we get closer to the conference, we can only afford to bring 100 people, which is still a lot of people. So we'll have kind of a application process for if you've been participating and you are interested in attending the in-person, we'll select 100 people. Who knows, maybe we'll only have 100 people in general. But then kind of do the wrap up, and then the plan will be to continue this conference, and participating teachers will who want to write curriculum and be engaged afterwards, they'll have a free seat at our conferences, all of our conferences moving forward, so they'll be able to have access and engage with the scholars, moving forward from here on in. So that's kind of the enduring legacy, hopefully part of it, is letting the teachers stay in touch with the people we work with.
Okay. Yeah. And so just to wrap it up, and speaking is a good segue there. What are you, what is your hope? What are your overall goal here for this entire program? We talked about some of the specific goals of the the course you're it's not really you're not creating
Not
a
writing a
class itself,
course.
but you're
Yeah.
creating a, you have goals for the resources you want to provide to these educators, and why you're going about this way. But what is the overarching, I guess, goal? What do you, when you look back at this in 2 years, what are you hoping to have accomplished?
I mean, there's the pie in the sky goal. I hope to, you know, change the way that we discuss firearms in America. I mean, and that is really ultimately the end game, right? Is to change the way people have conversations about firearms in the classroom and also, around the country. I want teachers, but really ultimately, I just want teachers to feel like they have a place to go to ask questions and gain resources and materials so that they can continue to teach these subjects because it's not going away. The subject's not going away. It does not seem like the subject is going to get less messy anytime soon. And so, hopefully we'll get people who will give us a chance in the next, year and a half, 2 years to show that we can create materials for them and engagement materials for them that are fair and balanced. And that those teachers will go forward and help bring in more teachers and create a much larger network where, I called it in my last interview earlier today. I think it's called a trickle up effect, right? So the teachers are gaining the information and hopefully we can expand that network of teachers. They teach students how to have a more nuanced concept and conversation about this, and then those students grow up and hopefully go into the world. And even if they don't go into, a gun, either side of the gun debate, that they can at least have a much more balanced conversation with people moving forward. So that is like super pie in the sky, but ultimately it would be for teachers to feel like they have a place where they can gain good information. And the long term would be if we get enough people involved in this that, students can walk away with a better understanding of it so they can deal with it better in their, lives moving forward.
All right. Well, hey, I appreciate you coming on and giving us more a better understanding of what's going on with this grant, what exactly you guys are up to. I think that's important. That sort of transparency is wonderful from my perspective as a reporter,
Yeah.
obviously. But for anyone who, I guess, for a teacher who might be interested in getting involved in the program you're developing here, I guess what would be the next steps? And for anyone else who's just interested in the Firearms Research Center and what you guys are doing, where can they find more information?
So we've got a pretty comprehensive website. That was one of the first things we really worked on was having a good website, so we could have a larger presence. So the website, super difficult to remember. It's firearmsresearchcenter.org. We have a UW one, but it's much more complicated. So just firearmsresearchcenter.org. If you go to the resources tab, you'll see there's a section for the grant. Actually, I think I looked at the website earlier, and I think actually if you look on the main page, it's down in the bottom left corner with our suicide prevention initiative and something else. And so you can, and in there, you can actually just add your email and you'll go to an email list specifically for the grant. So that when we start, advertising the webinars and all of that, you'll be involved immediately. And when we start sending updates and things, you'll be involved immediately. And if you are, just interested in what we're doing in general, you can go and just sign up and get our newsletters and everything. Like I said, we do a monthly webinar. We've put out 9 working papers this year on our site. We don't have our database done, but we do have a brief bank of a bank full of amicus briefs in different circuits and at the Supreme Court and federal levels. So there's lots of resources on there. We've got a pretty active forum. If you're somebody who's actually studying this and want to write for the forum, we're always open for people. Just even if you want to ever write for the forum, seriously, like you're welcome. We don't gatekeep on the content that I mean, I require people to be respectful. I've only had to tone down language a couple of times
Same
for
here
things, but
at the reload.
yeah.
I
But
understand.
we're always open for people to kind of and you don't have to just be a
I
scholar if
appreciate
you
that,
have a
and I might take you
background.
up on that as
Yeah.
well. And same for you here at the Reload as well. If you ever have like an analysis piece that you think might be
Okay.
it fit within what we try to do, feel free to let me know. But yeah, and I appreciate you joining us and giving us your time and giving people a way to find out more and get connected with what you're trying to do over there at the Firearms Research Center.
Well, I appreciate you giving me a chance to talk about it. There's going to be a lot of people talking about it, but I want
Yes.
people to hear it from me.
And I appreciate you. I like the nuanced approach. Obviously, it's a big part of what we do here at the Reload, and so I can appreciate what you're trying to accomplish with this, and that you're trying to get people to understand that it's not meant to be some black and white, political operation that you're putting together. It's much,
Yeah.
much more sophisticated than that. I would say, from what you've described here. Obviously, we will, as reporter, I'll follow what you're doing, ensure that you try that you actually follow through on
And
that
tell me
stuff.
if I'm
But
stepping a toe out of line.
I
Definitely
am
give me feedback.
I will, but I'm glad to hear that that's the approach you're taking. I mean, this sounds like a promising initiative, and I wish you luck that you're able to accomplish what you're setting out to do. Because
Well,
I
thank
think
you. I'm
I
excited,
think
but
it's the
it's a
right
lot of
approach.
work.
This is my just a personal opinion, but I do like the approach, and I hope that it's successful.
Thank you.
So that's all we've got for this week. I appreciate you joining us, and yeah, for everyone else listening, we will see you again real soon.